Same face syndrome has been something widely talked about in the art community for some time now. I'm sure you've seen at least one picture floating around of some anime girls with identical faces lined up next to each other. Or maybe some people comparing Disney girls under the same pretense of them all looking the same. Nowadays, it seems every artist wants to break free from the same face syndrome curse and prevent themselves from becoming one of those collages. As someone who used to fall under this category and has since improved at diversifying my way of drawing faces, I'll be giving my tips to making your characters' faces distinct. But first, we have to understand what same face syndrome actually is and what causes it to occur. As people use it today, same face syndrome is essentially what the title says, when someone draws faces near identically. This is not contained to one specific style or one specific face per se, but really just depends on the artist and what their default way of drawing faces is. Of course, this term is nuanced though, and I'd say that it's kind of a spectrum. For example, going back to anime, which is a popular example among these discussions, sometimes anime has same face syndrome in some areas and not others. A good example would be One Piece. A lot of the side and background characters have wildly different faces. However, a criticism that fans will often bring up is how every attractive woman in One Piece shares the same face. I personally don't watch this show, I've just seen people discuss it, but from the screenshots I've seen, I can definitely see where people are coming from. There's certainly outliers to this, but you could argue that One Piece has same face syndrome in some aspects and not others. It's easy to default to one face for a certain age group or characters deemed to be attractive, while being diverse in other regards. Honestly, there's a lot you could say in terms of connecting how a lot of same-face syndrome in media stems from a rigid definition of what is considered conventionally attractive, while those who fall outside of that are allowed to have more unique features. Hopefully I say this user right, but the TikTok user AlexMissale1 has a great video pointing this out. You can really see how drastic the art style in this manhwa changes when depicting characters that are supposed to be ugly versus the conventionally attractive leads. I'm not bringing this point up to say that if you fall under same face syndrome, you're playing into conventional beauty standards. Quite the opposite really, as this is something I notice more when watching anime or reading manhwa, and it's something that happens when different facial features are attached to negative traits rather than blanket sameness. It is an aspect of same face syndrome, and some artists certainly fall into this pitfall, but more often than not, a lot of people who struggle with same face syndrome are more beginner or intermediate artists, those who don't have the knowledge yet to fully break out of same face syndrome even if they want to. A lot of artists learn the most widely used method of drawing heads, the Loomis method. This method can certainly be diverse if you know how to adjust their proportions, but a lot of beginners only know how to use it at its most basic level. Because of this, a lot of artists end up drawing the same face by virtue of using the same base over and over without any changes. After all, the Loomis head is meant to be an average human head and is meant to be changed, but a lot of beginner artists don't fully realize that. When I started really diversifying my heads and faces was when I felt comfortable enough with anatomy to really try experimenting and trying new things, not sticking to average proportions or the usual head shape that is taught. So that's why I don't really feel that there's any shame in having same face syndrome. The art community preaches that rules must be learned before being broken, and the heavy emphasis on breaking out of same face syndrome can lead to beginner artists trying to diversify their faces before they've even learned basic proportions. That's why I think, more than anything, you should learn the Loomis head and the basic proportions of the head first. It's better to learn your fundamentals first than rush into things and stunt your progress because people are pressuring you to. And even aside from that, you truly don't have to fully diversify your faces if you don't want to. I've seen plenty of artists who don't draw the most diverse faces in the world, but still manage to have appealing and expressive art. Really, unless you're getting into concept art, it's not necessary if you don't want to. But going back into my previous point about perceived attractiveness and same face syndrome, you still want to be aware of those kinds of pitfalls lest we end up with another cooling art fixing disaster. Hopefully that tangent wasn't too long since this is ultimately a tip video, but I felt like not including a general discussion of same face syndrome would be a disservice. I don't want anyone taking this video as me saying that same face syndrome is blatantly bad, but rather unpacking how same face syndrome may occur and helping anyone who wants to work on it, rather than target individuals who are perfectly happy with their art. But with that huge ramble out of the way, let's get into the actual tips. I thought the best way to present my method of diversifying faces is by this pyramid. If you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's kind of formatted like that. Basically, the thing at the bottom is the most important thing to diversify your faces and what I consider the most notable feature. Going upwards, these features are certainly good to change, but not as noticeable as those lower on the pyramid. For example, I see a lot of people say to just change eye and nose shape in order to break out of same face syndrome. However, as you can see in this kind of ugly example, even though I changed the nose and eye shapes, it doesn't lead to much of a substantial difference, especially when viewed from afar. Of course, this is dependent on style, because if you have a style with huge eyes, it might make more of a difference, but I'm just talking general styles in a general sense. Of course, different styles have different ranges of stylization that might impact these tips. Hopefully the basis of this pyramid makes sense with that example though, and I'll be going over each part of the pyramid and fully explaining it. So let's go ahead and start at the top and work our way down. I'm just going to be covering facial features in general, even though they have a slight divide in the pyramid. The reason noses are slightly lower than things like eyes and mouths is a difference you can see when looking at a character's side profile. Different nose shapes will be fairly noticeable from this angle and impact the character's silhouette. But like I mentioned before, often simply changing facial features isn't enough. Yet, it's what I mainly see people talk about when discussing beating same face syndrome. So while I do enjoy drawing different eye and nose shapes, and it's something you should experiment with, from a front view it becomes difficult to distinguish these faces without additional changes. So because of that, let's move down into proportions. Honestly, this tier and the bottom are interchangeable in a way. You could argue one has more impact on diversifying the face over the other, but the placement is mostly just to maintain video flow. They both end up working hand in hand, but I'll discuss that later. Proportions are, simply put, the size and placement of different parts of the body relative to each other and the whole. But because that definition still sounds complex, let me dive into more examples. When drawing celebrities and people in general, a lot of likeness comes from their proportions. You can see this a lot in caricature art, where artists exaggerate certain features of a person while maintaining the general likeness. For one of my assignments, we had to practice caricature art by drawing celebrities as heroes or villains, and you can see that I attempted to capture Mark Zuckerberg by really focusing on his longer face and lengthening his nose to achieve that. Some people may have small or large eyes, or maybe their eyes sit higher or lower on their face, or maybe they're farther apart or closer together. Noses may be shorter or longer as well. Perhaps they have a bigger forehead or a smaller chin. Like I mentioned in the first section, strictly following the Luma's head more as a rule set than a general guide can lead to this lack of difference in proportion, when in reality, we all have different traits that make our faces unique and that fall outside of what would be considered the average face. I took the heads from the first section and tried slightly changing some of their proportions just to show that even smaller changes can make a difference in the look of the face. But in order to get substantial differences, let's see how proportion can work with head shape. I talk about head shape in my video about how I study heads, as well as my general method for drawing heads, so I won't get into that too much in this video. But in summary, what I've learned to do is use general shapes like circles, rectangles, or triangles, and turning those into heads using planes of the face. I think Spider-Verse does a good job at this especially. You can see in this screenshot that Gwen has a more triangular face, Miles is somewhat rectangular, and you could probably say that Peter Parker is a long oval or rectangle. They even use more complex shapes, like Miguel's head resembling a hexagon of sorts. But with all those examples, hopefully you can see how the shape of the face impacts the general look of the character. Miles and Gwen have relatively similar facial proportions given their similar age, but their face shape does a lot when it comes to making them look different. And because of Peter's longer face, his proportions change with it, having a longer nose and a higher eye placement. One thing I've noticed is that younger characters will usually have their facial features placed closer together, but that's for another video when I eventually cover drawing children and babies. But regardless, you can see how proportion and face shape can work hand in hand in these instances, and the visual differences they make. But of course, all parts of the pyramid work together, so trying to include differences in all of these features can lead to diverse faces, not just one or the other. Honestly, if you really want to beat same face syndrome, then play around with the meme maker. I'm being completely serious when I say that it perfectly demonstrates all the things I've been talking about. You can really see how different face shapes, proportions, and facial features impact the look of the character in a very stylized and easily understandable way. Maybe try making your characters as me's and see how you can change their face shape or proportions to try to differentiate them, and then apply that to how you draw them. But these concepts not only apply to faces, but bodies. I can easily make a pyramid with the same concepts for bodies. Differences that don't majorly impact the silhouette of the body, like scars, birthmarks, or moles, could be at the top, similar to facial features. Proportions have to do with height, length of the arms and legs, or perhaps the size of the hands and feet relative to the rest of the body. Then at the bottom would be body type, whether that be skinny, muscular, fat, or anything in between. So hopefully with these tips, you can begin to start diversifying your faces. It's certainly not an easy task, and I struggle trying to break out of my old habits as well. In fact, the speed paint I've been showing throughout this video, I still think I could do more to diversify these faces. It's a bit of an old piece, and I think now I could really push the proportions and face shapes to be even more unique than what I did here. The phrase "old habits die hard" is incredibly true in this case, but that concentrated effort and hard work will eventually be worth it. At least for me, I love drawing diverse faces, and trying to find new ways to work on my skills is something I find incredibly exciting in art. So if you feel the same way, I hope this video has helped you, and you can have a better idea of how to approach beating same face syndrome. But with that, that's the end of my video. Hopefully you found these tips helpful. I know it's probably going to be more on the shorter side, but I didn't want to ramble on, and there's not too much else I could probably say about same face syndrome. I do find some of the causes interesting, but that's probably for another video. I didn't want to rant about something that the video isn't even really about. But if there's any other videos you want to see from me, feel free to comment it. My next one is going to be more OC crafts and such, so I'm really excited about that. We'll see how that goes. But with that, thank you for watching, and I hope you all have a great day.